Are you sure you want to test this girl? Just look at her, Michael Blackwood whispered to his executive assistant, loud enough for Leah Goldstein to hear every word as she waited nervously in the luxurious 47th floor office. The Manhattan real estate mogul was indulging in his favorite pastime, publicly humiliating people he considered inferior. His company, Blackwood Enterprises, had just closed the biggest real estate deal of the decade, a luxury tower complex that would displace hundreds of working-class families, including little Leah and her mother. Richard Sterling, the company's corporate lawyer, adjusted his Italian glasses and glanced impatiently at his Rolex watch. "Michael, let's get this over with. It's Friday, and I have dinner at the plaza," Richard said. Leah Goldstein never imagined she would be there. At 12 years old, the daughter of Jewish immigrants who arrived in the United States with only a suitcase and many dreams, she had grown up in the hallways and cleaning rooms of the building where her mother worked. Her black shoes, though carefully polished, were worn down by time. Her school backpack from the public library contained books that seemed disproportionate to her delicate size. An assistant approached with an old leather briefcase. "The H. Heilberg document as requested," he announced with a mischievous smile. The 5 Harvard linguists completely failed at the translation. A murmur of curiosity rippled through the executives in the office. This was the famous scroll Michael used to humiliate visiting academics, a cruel display of intellectual superiority he loved to flaunt. "Is something wrong, dear?" Michael asked, arching a perfect eyebrow when he noticed Leah's momentary hesitation upon seeing the document. Leah scanned the strange characters on the parchment, recognizing familiar patterns that sparked memories of afternoons in the library and conversations with her grandfather, Morai. There was something about those symbols that connected her to stories she knew, languages she had studied in secret. "No, sir," she replied finally, her voice low but firm. "Perfect!" Michael roared with satisfaction, clapping his hands. A little girl from a family of cleaners trying to decipher what university professors with decades of experience couldn't. This is going to be absolutely hilarious. Rebecca Goldstein remained standing near the door, clutching her cleaning cart as if it were a protective shield. For 6 years she had endured similar comments from Michael, developing an emotional resilience to survive the daily insults. But seeing her daughter humiliated in this way was different. It was a pain that cut deeper than any personal offense. Leah studied the document with an intensity that was disconcerting for a child her age. Her eyes moved across the ancient characters, recognizing linguistic structures she had encountered in library books, in conversations with immigrants in the neighborhood, in the stories her grandfather told about Eastern Europe. "You know what's funny?" Michael addressed the executives, his voice becoming even more venomous. "This girl's family is being evicted from their apartment next week because of our new project. And here she is, trying to impress you with knowledge she obviously doesn't have." The words hit Leah like a punch in the stomach. She didn't know about the impending eviction, didn't know that her family was about to lose the only home they knew in New York, but instead of falling apart, something strange happened inside her. A cold determination solidified like steel. "Can I ask a question before we begin?" Leah said, surprising everyone in the room with her sudden calm. Michael blinked, confused by the girl's change in tone. "Of course, dear. What's your last question before the humiliation?" Michael asked, looking down at her. Leah looked Michael straight in the eye for the first time since she had entered the office. "How many languages do you speak?" The question caught Michael completely off guard. All his life, he had used his wealth as his only measure of superiority, never needing to demonstrate specific academic knowledge. "That's not relevant," Michael stammered, feeling for the first time in years that he was losing control of the conversation. "I'm a successful businessman. So, you don't know how many languages you speak," Leah declared with simple but devastating logic. "That means you can't read this document either, correct?" The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca looked at her daughter with a mixture of horror and admiration. In her 12 years, she had never seen Leah challenge an adult in this way, let alone a powerful man like Michael Blackwood. Michael felt his face flush, a combination of anger and something he hadn't experienced in decades, genuine embarrassment. This 12-year-old girl had just exposed the fundamental fragility of his logic with the brutal clarity of youth. "That's completely different," he exploded, his voice echoing through the marble office. "I built a billion-dollar empire, but that doesn't make you smarter than the teachers who couldn't read the document." Leah replied with the same unshakable calm. My library teacher says that real intelligence can't be bought with money. As everyone watched in absolute shock, Leah Goldstein was about to do something that would not only change her life, but reveal a secret she had kept for years. There, in front of all the scornful stares, she maintained a serenity that only exists in those who carry knowledge far deeper than anyone in that room could imagine. If this story of courage and determination is touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple question turned into the greatest lesson in humility a millionaire has ever received. Enough of this insolence, Michael exploded, slamming his fist on the mahogany table so hard that all the expensive objects jumped. You're just a kid from a family of cleaners. How dare you question me? But as Michael yelled, something strange was happening in Leah's eyes. Instead of backing away in fear, she seemed to be evaluating every word he said, as if she were studying an interesting specimen under a microscope. "Mr. Blackwood," Leah said calmly, "can I see the document now, or would you prefer to continue yelling?" The question was asked with such disconcerting maturity that even Richard Sterling stopped checking his phone. Rebecca held her breath. Her daughter was entering dangerous territory with a man who had the power to destroy their lives. Michael forced himself to sit up, trying to regain control of the situation. For 54 years, he had dominated people through intimidation, and never, ever had a child managed to throw him off balance like this. "Very well, little know-it-all," he said, pushing the document toward Leah with unnecessary force. "But when you fail, and you will fail miserably, I want your mother to hear every word of the lesson I'm going to teach you about ambition over reality." Leah took the parchment with reverential care, as if she were holding something sacred. Her fingers traced the ancient characters delicately, and Michael noticed something that disturbed him deeply. She didn't seem surprised or intimidated by the strange symbols. "Interesting," Leah murmured, more to herself. "Ancient Hebrew mixed with Aramaic. A few words in Ladino, and this here looks like medieval Yiddish. Doulas." The words came out of her mouth so naturally that Michael didn't initially process what he had heard. When he finally understood, he felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. "What did you say?" he whispered, his arrogance evaporating like smoke. "I said I can identify at least 4 different languages in this document," Leah replied, looking up to meet his gaze. "All related to the Jewish tradition and the communities of Eastern Europe." Rebecca slowly approached, just as shocked as Michael. She knew Leah was a good student, but she had never imagined her daughter possessed such advanced linguistic knowledge. "That's impossible," Richard Sterling interjected, finally paying full attention to the conversation. "Where would a child like you learn dead languages?" Leah smiled for the first time since she had entered the office. Not a child's smile, but something that carried the wisdom of generations. "From my grandfather, Morai," she replied with genuine pride. "He was a rabbi in Kov before the war. When he came here, he worked as a Tor during the day, but every night he taught me the languages our people spoke for centuries." The revelation struck Michael like a bolt of lightning. For years, he had assumed that the Goldstein family were ignorant immigrants, uneducated refugees who had come to the United States in search of manual labor. He had never considered that they might carry a 1,000-year-old intellectual heritage. "What's more," Leah continued, her confidence growing with every word, "I spend every afternoon at the public library studying with Dr. Rosenberg, who was a professor of linguistics at the University of Warsaw. He teaches me for free because he says it's important to preserve our knowledge." Michael felt nauseous. "Dr. Rosenberg," he muttered, recognizing the name. He was the old Jewish man he sometimes saw sweeping the courtyard of the building, a man he had automatically dismissed as just another general service worker. The idea that this man could be an academic in disguise made him wonder how many other brilliant people he had ignored or humiliated. "But you're only 12 years old," Michael stammered, desperate to maintain some control of the narrative. "How can you master languages that take decades to learn?" "Because I started when I was 5, Leah explained patiently. "My grandfather used to say that children are like sponges. We absorb knowledge naturally when there is someone willing to teach with love and patience." Each word was like a stab in Michael's conscience. He thought of his own children, who attended expensive private schools but could barely hold intelligent conversations, raised by nannies while he worked obsessively to accumulate more wealth. "So, you really think you can translate this document?" Michael asked. though his voice no longer carried the same cruel arrogance as before. "Not only can I translate it," Leah said, studying the parchment more closely. "I can explain the historical context of each section and why it was written in this specific way." The silence that followed was different from before. It was no longer tense with anticipation of humiliation, but heavy with the realization that everyone in the office was about to witness something extraordinary.
Rebecca watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and terror. Pride, because she was finally seeing the true extent of Leah's intelligence. Terror, because she knew that Michael Blackwood was not the kind of man who took kindly to being outdone, especially by a child from a family he considered inferior. Michael, meanwhile, was experiencing something he hadn't felt in decades: genuine uncertainty. This 12-year-old girl had systematically destroyed every one of his assumptions about intelligence, social class, and human worth. "Very well," he said finally, his voice with suppressed emotion. "Show me what you know." Leah nodded and leaned over the document, preparing to demonstrate knowledge that would reveal not only her own extraordinary education, but expose the cruel ignorance Michael had used as a weapon throughout his life. What would happen in the next few minutes would forever change the way Michael Blackwood saw the world and himself. Leah took a deep breath and began to read the first paragraph of the document aloud. What came out of her mouth left everyone in the office completely speechless. Baruch Hashem ki rachum v'chanun. The words in ancient Hebrew flowed from her lips with such perfect pronunciation that it seemed impossible coming from a 12-year-old American girl. Michael clung to the edges of his chair, feeling as if the world was spinning out of control. This was not a girl pretending to be knowledgeable. This was a genuine scholar, speaking a language he didn't even recognize. "It means, 'Blessed be the name, for he is merciful and gracious,'" Leah translated calmly before continuing to read the second section in Aramaic with the same supernatural fluency. Richard Sterling dropped his phone completely, his jaw hanging open in utter shock. In his 15 years as a corporate lawyer, he had worked with the supposed best academics in the country, but he had never witnessed such a display of linguistic knowledge. But Leah was just getting started. When she reached the third paragraph, she switched to what sounded like medieval Yiddish, her voice taking on a musical quality that made Rebecca clasp her hands over her heart, tears welling up in her eyes. "My grandmother used to talk like that," Rebecca whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't know you learned," she added. "Grandma Esther taught me before she died," Leah explained softly without stopping her study of the document. "She said it was important to keep the voices of our ancestors alive." Michael felt something strange happening in his chest, a mixture of deep shame and something that could have been admiration. For years, he had operated under the belief that people like the Goldstein family were uneducated refugees, when in reality they carried a tradition of knowledge that dated back millennia. "But wait," Leah said, frowning as she studied a specific section of the document. "There's something strange here." "What do you mean?" Michael asked, his previous hostility replaced by genuine curiosity. "This part isn't ancient Hebrew," Leah pointed to a section of the scroll. "It's Ladino, the language Sephardic Jews developed in medieval Spain. And this other section, that's Judeo-Arabic, a form of Arabic written in Hebrew characters that was used in North Africa." Each revelation was like a gentle slap in the face of Michael's ignorance. He had assumed he was dealing with just a poor Ashkenazi family, unaware of the rich cultural tapestry Leah represented. "How many languages do you actually speak?" Richard Sterling asked, his voice heavy with disbelief. Leah looked up from the document, a small smile playing on her lips. "Well, if we only count the ones I speak fluently, native English, modern and ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, Yiddish, Ladino, Judeo-Arabic, Russian, and Polish. That's 9 languages," Michael calculated automatically, his voice coming out as a strangled whisper. "Actually, it's 10, Leah corrected gently. "I also speak French. Madame Cohen, who lives in our building, teaches me on Sundays in exchange for my helping her with her shopping." Michael had to hold on to the table to keep from falling out of his chair. Madame Cohen, the elderly woman he always saw carrying heavy bags, another person he had automatically categorized as unimportant. Now he discovered that she was a volunteer educator contributing to this girl's extraordinary intellectual development. "How?" Michael stammered. "How does a child learn 10 languages?" "It's simple," Leah replied with the patience of a teacher explaining something obvious.
When you grow up in a building full of immigrants from different countries, every neighbor becomes a potential teacher. Mr. Petrov teaches me Russian while he repairs bicycles in the basement. The Kowalski family practices Polish with me while we tend the community garden. Each name she mentioned was like a slap to Michael's conscience. These were all people who lived and worked in his own building. People he had treated as invisible for years without realizing that they formed an extraordinary educational community. "But the document," Michael said, desperate to maintain some control over the situation. "You haven't translated it completely yet." "Because I'm trying to understand why it was written this way," Leah explained, turning her attention back to the parchment. "It's not just a text. It's a puzzle. Each language tells a part of the same story, but from different cultural perspectives." Rebecca approached, fascinated, despite her nervousness. "What kind of story?" Leah studied the document for a few more moments, before looking up with an expression that mixed surprise and what might have been amusement. "It's a parable about true wealth," she said slowly, "about a powerful man who amassed great fortunes, but lost the ability to see the value in the people around him." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael felt as if Leah had looked directly into his soul and described exactly who he had become. "Go on," he said, his voice filled with emotion he couldn't identify.
Leah returned to the document, preparing to reveal a translation that would not only demonstrate her extraordinary education, but serve as a brutal mirror reflecting the wasted life Michael had built. What she was about to read would not only change Michael's perception of himself, but reveal that the real treasure had been hidden in plain sight, in the brilliant minds of the people he had chosen to ignore and despise. The transformation was about to begin, one ancient word at a time. Leah began reading the complete translation, and every word that came out of her mouth was like a hammer, demolishing the world of arrogance that Michael had built over decades. Once upon a time, there was a man who owned towers that touched the clouds, and coffers overflowing with gold, Leah translated, her clear voice echoing through the silent office. But the more wealth he accumulated, the poorer his heart became, until one day he could no longer see the light that shone in the souls around him. Michael felt the blood drain from his face. The words of a medieval text were describing his life with a surgical precision that seemed impossible. "The proud man despised the wise men disguised as servants," Leah continued, not realizing that in his own house lived teachers who knew the languages of heaven and earth. Richard Sterling glanced nervously at Michael, realizing that his boss was experiencing some kind of emotional breakdown. He had never seen the real estate mogul so vulnerable, so completely disarmed.
"Until the day came," Leah continued, "when a little child, sent as a messenger of wisdom, revealed to the proud man that he had become the poorest of all the rich. Rich in possessions, but a beggar in humanity." Tears began to form in Michael's eyes. For 54 years he had measured his worth by the size of his bank account and the fear he inspired in others. Now, a 12-year-old girl was showing him that he had wasted his entire life chasing the wrong metrics. "The parable ends with a question," Leah said, looking up from the document to face Michael directly. "Which is worth more? 1,000 gold coins that cannot buy a moment of true joy, or a single word of wisdom that can transform a soul?" The silence that followed was absolute. Michael tried to speak, but only a strangled sound came out of his throat. His entire identity, everything he believed about success and human worth, had been systematically demolished by a child he had tried to humiliate. "Leah," Michael whispered finally, how can a 12-year-old girl understand things that I've never understood in 54 years of life?" Leah tilted her head, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because my family taught me that true education doesn't come from how much money you have to spend on it, but how much curiosity you have to seek it out." Each word was a revelation to Michael. He thought of his own children, who attended the most expensive schools in Manhattan, but whom he barely knew, always too busy building his empire to really talk to them.
"You said you speak 10 languages, Richard Sterling interjected, still trying to process what he had witnessed.
Where do you plan to use that knowledge? I want to be an interpreter at the United Nations, Leah replied without hesitation, to help people from different cultures understand each other better, to build bridges instead of walls. The simplicity and nobility of her goals contrasted brutally with the empty life Michael had built. He hoarded property to separate himself from people in need, while this girl learned languages to connect humanity. Your family will be evicted next week, Michael said, the reality of his own cruel actions finally sinking in. I destroyed your dreams. Rebecca moved closer to her daughter, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. Mr. Blackwood, we'll find another place. Leah is strong. We are strong. No, Michael said, rising abruptly from his chair. His voice had a different quality now, no longer the cruel arrogance of before, but something that could be genuine despair. I can't be responsible for destroying something so extraordinary. He walked over to the panoramic window, looking out at the city he had conquered through greed and cruelty. Leah, in all these years of building my empire, I never stopped to think about the people I was displacing. I never cared about the families I was tearing apart or the dreams I was destroying. But now you do, Leah said softly. And knowledge brings responsibility. Michael turned, facing the girl who had become his most important teacher. What can I do? How can I fix what I've broken? Leah exchanged a glance with her mother before answering. You could start by really getting to know the people who live in your buildings. Find out their stories, their skills, their dreams. You might find you're surrounded by treasures you never knew existed.
What about the eviction? Michael asked, embarrassed. You own the building, Leah replied with simple logic. You can call off the eviction if you want. Michael felt something he hadn't felt in decades, real hope for redemption. Leah, would you give me a chance to be better? Everyone deserves a second chance, Leah replied, echoing the words her grandfather always told her. But chances only work when people really want to change. Michael nodded vigorously. I want to change. I don't know how, but I want to learn. Leah smiled, the first genuine smile she had given since entering the office. Then maybe you can start by coming to the public library tomorrow. You have a lot to learn, and my teachers always say, it's never too late to start. The idea of Michael Blackwood, Manhattan's most feared real estate mogul, learning languages at a public library was so revolutionary that it seemed impossible. But as he looked at Leah, this extraordinary girl who had shattered his illusions and offered him hope for redemption, he knew that it was exactly the kind of impossible his life needed. 6 months after that fateful encounter, Michael Blackwood found himself in a place he never imagined he would be, sitting at a plastic table in the public library, struggling to pronounce basic Hebrew words, while Leah Goldstein, now 13, patiently corrected his mistakes. Shalom, Michael tried for the 10th time, his pronunciation still imperfect, but improving every week.
Better, Leah smiled. Do you remember what it means? Peace, Michael replied, and for the first time in decades he truly understood the profound meaning of the word. The transformation had been gradual but profound. The eviction project was cancelled the same day as the confrontation, but that was only the beginning. Michael had discovered that his buildings were home to an extraordinary community of intellectuals, artists, teachers and translators who had come to the United States as refugees or immigrants. Dr. Rosenberg, Michael greeted the retired linguistics professor who now coordinated free language classes at 5 city libraries, all funded by the newly created Leah Goldstein Foundation for Multicultural Education. Michael, the elderly man replied warmly. He was no longer the invisible old man who swept courtyards, but a respected educator whose knowledge was transforming hundreds of lives. How are your Aramaic studies going? Michael smiled genuinely, an expression his former associates would not recognize. Difficult, but rewarding. Leah is a much more patient teacher than I deserve. Over the past 6 months, Michael had implemented revolutionary changes across all of his properties. What were once low-income apartments designed for maximum profit had now become vibrant community centers where residents shared knowledge, skills, and cultures. Mr. Blackwood, a young voice called out to him. It was David Chen, a 14-year-old boy whose parents worked at a laundromat. I got the scholarship to prep school. Michael stood up to greet the teenager, remembering how 6 months earlier he would have ignored this family completely. David, that's wonderful. When do classes start? Next week, David replied, beaming. And it's all thanks to the tutoring program Leah organized. The program had grown organically. Leah discovered that many residents of Michael's buildings had extraordinary qualifications, engineers, doctors, college professors, who were working in survival jobs while revalidating degrees or learning English. Now they tutored neighborhood children, creating a network of academic excellence that was transforming lives. Leah Goldstein approached, carrying documents from her new position as Director of Community Development at Blackwood Enterprises. She was no longer the invisible cleaning lady, but a respected leader who had revolutionized the way the company interacted with communities. "How did enrollment go for the exchange program?" Michael asked. "Amazing," Rebecca smiled. "We have 150 young people who will spend the summer learning languages in Israel, France, Poland, and Russia. Many will be the first in their families to travel internationally." Michael felt a satisfaction he had never experienced in any real estate transaction. Discovering that he could use his wealth to create opportunities rather than limit them had been the most important revelation of his life. "And how are you feeling about college?" Michael asked Leah, who had been accepted into a special language study program at Columbia at the age of 13. "Nervous but excited," Leah admitted. "Professor Mendelsohn says my knowledge of Semitic languages is equivalent to that of a doctoral student."
Michael shook his head in admiration. 6 months earlier, he had tried to humiliate this extraordinary girl. Now she was about to become the youngest student ever accepted into Columbia's prestigious linguistics program. "Leah," Michael said, his voice heavy with genuine emotion, "I want you to know something. That day in my office, you didn't just teach me about languages, you taught me about humanity." Leah studied him with those wise eyes that always seemed to see more than should be possible in someone so young. "You chose to learn. That was the most important part. But I had to completely lose my mind first," Michael laughed, a self-deprecating laugh his former partners had never heard before. "Sometimes we have to break ourselves completely before we can discover who we really are." Leah observed with a wisdom that transcended her age. Michael looked around the library at Dr. Rosenberg teaching Arabic to a group of teenagers, at Madame Cohen helping children with French, at David Chen being tutored in math by a Syrian engineer, at Rebecca coordinating programs that were changing hundreds of lives. "You know what I've discovered?" Michael said finally. "For 54 years, I accumulated property and money, thinking that was wealth. But the real wealth was here all along, in the brilliant minds, the generous hearts, the ancient traditions that people carried with them." Leah smiled. "My grandfather always said that the best inheritance we can leave behind is not houses or gold, but shared knowledge and multiplied kindness." Michael nodded, finally understanding the depth of those words. His company was no longer just about profit. It had become a force for social justice, creating educational opportunities, preserving cultures, and connecting communities. "Michael," a woman approached. It was Elena Petro, who used to clean offices but now coordinated the community art program. "The murals are ready. Would you like to see them?" They walked together to the outside wall of the library, where a colorful mural depicted people from dozens of different nationalities, all connected by golden threads representing shared languages. In the center of the mural, a small girl held an open book, and around her, the word peace was written in 50 different languages. "It's perfect," Michael whispered, tears welling up in his eyes. As the sun set over Manhattan that evening, Michael reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with his cruel attempt to humiliate a child. Leah Goldstein had not only withstood his cruelty, but she had offered redemption, transforming a broken man into someone who finally understood the true meaning of wealth. The girl who spoke 9 languages had taught him the most important language of all, the language of humanity, compassion, and genuine connection between people of all backgrounds. Michael learned that true greatness doesn't come from humiliating others, but from lifting their spirits. That real education can't be bought, it's shared. And that sometimes the greatest lessons in life come from the most unlikely voices. If this story touched your heart and inspired you to see the people around you with different eyes, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about second chances, transformation, and the power of education to change lives.